Hello friends, welcome to the channel. I'm Christopher and this is Challenger Tabletop, another paint and chat stream where we're going to be painting some Warhammer 40k miniatures and talking about, thought today we'd talk about Games Workshop and 3D printing. So this is kind of a hot topic for a couple years now, and it's really kind of interesting to see where it's going, and we're just going to discuss everything about Games Workshop and 3D printing. Meanwhile, as far as what to paint today, I couldn't quite decide on a miniature I wanted to paint, and I thought instead I would focus on clearing half-finished stuff off of my painting desk. So I'll show you some of what we're going to be painting today. Switching over to the painting cam here. Alright, here we go. So I did pick up a bunch of grots on eBay, and some of these were already painted or half painted, and I've just been slowly working on them on my days off, just trying to get them kind of up to finished standard. So I started with the bases, and there's sort of three different styles I've got here from three different auctions. So there's these ones that are on the rocky or brick bases, and they're painted to a pretty finished level, but not super consistently. Like you can see, he's got a black dagger here, and I wanted to change some of the colors on these guys for my Goths clan. I wanted to do more black clothing. Then we've got, maybe I'll zoom in a bit closer on these. So wait a minute, I think these others are more finished. So these ones on the brick bases were pretty finished. Maybe actually they were more like half painted. Looks like the skin was based on there, and we also had the eyes and teeth painted, and some of the weapons and clothing. But then these, I had another set here of I think 10, which were actually very finished. So here you can see one of these. Let's get them in focus. Where pretty much everything was painted. The weapons I don't think were ink washed. And a lot of the clothing was done in this sort of very dark brown, which you can see on his pants, and I think that's all right. I might add some lighter browns there, or just leave it as is, or paint them black. And then there were these ones that were not as finished. They were just had green on the skin, and I've been going in and painting the clothing black, painted the weapons silver. I've been doing a fair bit on these, and you see when I painted the bases I wasn't very careful and I got some paint on his feet. So just kind of doing cleanup and ink washes and touching up stuff that wasn't really painted. Eyes weren't painted, stuff like that. And what else is on my desk? We've got the nameplate for this awesome Cult Locust. This was the one I named Adrian. He messaged on Facebook. I guess he posted a story saying he was very proud to have this miniature named after him. So pretty cool. Named after Adrian from Tabletop Titans down in the Bay Area. So just gonna be painting his name tag. I was thinking about switching the names on that one, but I think I'll leave it since he was quite happy about it. Then I've got my good old Cult Patriarch here. I recently bumped him up to a 50 millimeter base, something like that. Maybe he's even on a 60. Anyway, I think I got him on the right size base, but been working on getting him touched up a bit. There's some areas like on his claw where I shaved off some flashing and or mold line and managed to take off some paint. And overall, to use kind of a speed paint, I thought he might deserve a little bit of extra love, maybe some details on the face painted, some lighter pinks on the head. And then I added a whole bunch of Space Marine helmets to his sort of skull base to help it blend into the bigger base. And so far they were prime black, and I painted kind of a light coat of gray on them to help them blend into the base. But I thought I ought to paint those helmets a little bit better. And lastly, we've got a Cult Chimera. This was a Brood Brothers Chimera for my Genestealer Cult Brood Brothers, and I had some Genestealer Cult icons on it, but now I've decided to turn it into a Planetary Defense Force Chimera for my Imperial Guard. So let's zoom out so you can see the whole vehicle there. So just wanted to touch up these areas where it's pretty obvious it had a Genestealer Cult icon on it, and make it just look more dirty, flat red like the rest of the armor there. So those are kind of what I wanted to get to, and then if we finish all that and I still have energy, I might work on some of my Imperial Guardsmen. These guys were Genestealer Cult Brood Brothers, and their skin was painted sort of bright pink to be part of the Genestealer Cult, and all I really want to do with these guys is just paint their skin in a more human tone to convert them back to being good old Imperial Guardsmen. Nothing suspicious going on here. Alright, so let's get right into it. Got my cup of coffee here. Let me take a sip. And I've got some notes about the today's topic, Games Workshop and 3D printing. So I'll just kind of introduce the topic as I start on this Chimera here. And basically, if you haven't been following the developments around 3D printing, let's switch my water and my coffee. All right, what could go wrong? So if you haven't been following the developments with 3D printing and Games Workshop over the last, I would say, 5 to 10 years, basically 3D printing is something of a threat to the Games Workshop business model of selling kits of miniatures for, $30 to $55 a piece. And of course, some miniature kits cost much more than that. And when you get up to buying Titan size models, you could be spending $500 or more, 500 pounds or more probably, on some of the models that are sold by Games Workshop and their sister company, Forge World. So, because the models are so expensive, ever since 3D printing began to take off, players have been 3D printing proxy models, that is, models not made by Games Workshop, but to be used in their games. So I guess we can go back even further to say that even before 3D printing began to take off, we had other companies spring up who were designing and selling Warhammer-like models that could be used as proxies in Warhammer 40k, or else were intended for their own game. So probably at this point the most well-known company doing this would be Cromlech, which is a miniatures designing company in Eastern Europe. Sorry, I didn't do enough research to know exactly where they're based. I want to say Czech Republic or somewhere, or Poland. But Cromlech for many years has been designing miniatures that look very similar and are the same scale to Warhammer miniatures or Games Workshop miniatures, and are basically compatible with the game, but do not necessarily use a Games Workshop intellectual property, and are just different enough, and maybe don't use the same words and names as Warhammer, that they can sort of fly under the radar, or at least avoid direct intellectual property lawsuits from Games Workshop. And this is not to say that Games Workshop hasn't tried to take legal action against them. I'm sure they've investigated the possibility. But basically, Cromlech's business model has been designed to try to skirt the intellectual property laws, or at least to work around them. So I'm not saying that they're doing anything illegal, but they are definitely doing something Games Workshop, I would say, doesn't like, which is profiting from selling to their players. They're basically going right up to the edge of pirating Games Workshop intellectual property without actually doing it. And if we look further back, I guess, at what is the name of the company that makes War Machine? But War Machine and Hordes are a couple of games that were started probably decades ago at this point. I want to say early 2000s or late 90s, that were also very similar, clearly inspired by Games Workshop success and games. And War Machine was sort of a skirmish game played on round bases with miniatures that were the same scale as Warhammer and Warhammer 40k. And Hordes was a sort of epic battle game using miniatures of the same scale but on square bases fighting together in units, similar to Warhammer Fantasy. And there have been War Machine miniatures that have come out that are very similar to Games Workshop kits. Hey, great, we got a comment from the Clear Sound of Jules. I'm in the process of doing a few copies of Games Workshop models to see if I can do it. Well, you're not alone. In recent years, a whole bunch of independent miniature designers have been following the kind of example of Cromlech and designing miniatures that are very similar with sort of a few tweaks or just different enough from Games Workshop models that they're compatible as proxies, but not necessarily a direct theft of the intellectual property. So they're not exactly taking, 3D scans of the miniatures or anything like that. They're designing their own miniatures, but simply making them close enough that they could be used for Warhammer 40k or another Games Workshop game, which is, I assume, what you're doing, Clear Sound. And by the way, which miniatures which miniatures are you designing proxies for? I don't think I can get you in trouble by asking that question. Well, we got the first base coat on the Chimera. I'm just trying to clear my hobby desk here of all the sort of half-finished projects. This is a miniature I painted a couple weeks ago and just needs a nameplate. It's my Cult Locus, kind of an assassin for Genestealer Cult. Assassin bodyguard, I guess. And name this guy Adrian. Just going to be painting this nameplate silver. I guess as more and more talented designers have been taking a crack at imitating various Games Workshop models, the quality that they can do has been getting better and better, to the point where some of the more dated Warhammer models like Catachans or Chaos Space Marines, you could actually find cooler, more modern models in the 3D printed sphere than Games Workshop actually sells. So in some cases, you aren't just getting like knockoffs, you're actually able to get an improvement or something of at least comparable quality to Games Workshop. And it's becoming a bigger and bigger thing, I would say, with no sign of slowing down. Although I'm sure Games Workshop would like to put the brakes on it if they could with their army of lawyers. And I'm sure that all it takes is kind of a small slip up using the wrong copywritten Games Workshop word or name on your web page to get a cease and desist order. So, what is the source of this problem? I would say on the one hand, Games Workshop models are getting ever more expensive to produce and are selling for ever higher retail prices. And this is partly due to inflation, but also the cost of paying your designers, shipping products around the world, printing the rule books and stuff always gets more expensive. And then the actual cost of, what's the word? Casting the miniatures, I guess. Oh, Clear Sound says, I'm doing an exact copy of an Abominant to learn how to sculpt at that scale. Well, that's very interesting. I guess my advice is to not make an exact copy, as then you may actually be liable for some kind of intellectual property theft, just like someone who's selling recasts. And Games Workshop even doesn't really tolerate having their intellectual property distributed for free. Like, they've sent cease and desist even to people who are doing free game mods and stuff like that. You can copy stuff, you can't sell them or distribute them though. Oh, well, that's a fair point. If you're not planning to distribute it at all. I've actually done the same thing. I made my own Games Workshop board game, a mod of Axis and Allies that I personally think is super awesome, and I pretty much haven't distributed it at all because for that reason. Games Workshop intellectual property. And they do have a reputation for being extremely litigious and for sending cease and desist orders to people who are not making any money. So I'm not really a fan of those kind of policies, but Games Workshop has kind of become known for very vigorously defending their intellectual property to the maximum extent of the law. And they were for a while letting people create their own Warhammer animations or 40k animations and post them to YouTube. And then finally they started Warhammer Plus and they sent cease and desist to all those people, which I thought was pretty heavy-handed. Although they offered them jobs to come make animations for Games Workshop in some cases, still I think it was not really a necessary move, but I guess they were trying to make them an offer they couldn't refuse, and to keep control of their IP. So at the same time that Games Workshop models have been getting more and more expensive, kits that used to sell for $15 are now selling for $55, 20 years later. Talking about new kits, although a lot of old stuff has also become quite expensive. The costs of 3D printing are going down and down along with the proliferation of skilled designers and people with actual 3D printers. So I've seen some people online bragging that they created, a whole Warhammer 40k army for, under $50. I think even under $20 in terms of the raw materials of resin used to print the miniatures. And I assume they were using free STLs. STL is the file format that's used to distribute a 3D printable design. But you can also spend money to buy very professional STLs made by independent designers. And I guess you also have to buy your 3D printer, so there are definitely some costs involved. But once you have your printer and your designs, you can actually create miniatures very cheap. 10-20 cents a miniature probably, or less, compared to, on average, maybe $2 to $5 per miniature purchased retail from a box kit sold by Games Workshop. Sometimes much more. I mean, you'll see individual models going for $25, $30, $35 for like a single character model. So that difference in affordability is, I would say, kind of the root of Games Workshop's problem, or the dilemma that they find themselves in now. And if you look at the trends, basically more and more and more people are getting access to 3D printers or know someone who has one, and more designs are available for sale and for free online for STLs that are close enough to Games Workshop to use as a proxy. So that's kind of the issue. I guess that's the subject of today's chat. So Clear Sound Jules, be curious to hear your thoughts on Games Workshop and the 3D printing dilemma. That's kind of what I'm going to be touching on, all the sort of key points I can think of today on that subject. But let me go ahead and find something else to work on here. Maybe we'll work on this base on the Primarch here, or Patriarch, excuse me. So I'm thinking that most of these skulls are going to be Dark Angels, but maybe we'll actually have a mix. Have some Deathwing Terminators, some black helmets, maybe some yellow. I have a friend who plays Imperial Fists, so we've already got one yellow helmet on there. Maybe we'll do a few more. So pardon me a moment while I dig out some colors that seem appropriate. Get some yellows. Maybe we'll do a red helmet or two. Silver. I can try out this Screaming Skull paint I picked up the other day. Do some bone. And we have white out already. That should be a pretty good mix. Let's do a few that are Brass Scorpion. I've been playing games against a player Mark, who plays Templar of the Broken Shard, and they're kind of a brassy color, so that'll be fun to have some that look kind of like his guys. So the future trend that we're seeing is that, or at least that we're predicting, is that as 3D printing really takes off, Games Workshop miniature sales are going to slump or possibly crash. And I've heard sort of anecdotally some examples of this. I had a player who was in chat a couple weeks back who said that at his local gaming store there was two players who 3D printed entire Warhammer 40k armies, and they were using them in a like a Warhammer League, and this league was being played at a gaming store, and they weren't exactly secretive about the fact that they 3D printed their armies. They were almost more like bragging about it and about how cheap it was to print whole armies of 40k. And they started offering to other players, hey, do you want me to 3D print miniatures for you? You know, hey, I'll print you a whole army. At least that was my impression. Kind of offers they're making to other players. And the staff of the store basically picked up on this, and maybe they were even noticing that their sales were starting to slump. And it wasn't long after this that they cut their order and stock of Games Workshop miniatures or Warhammer 40k miniatures by about 50%. So the store was buying half as much Warhammer, they had half as much on the store shelves, and this was basically a response to the players adopting 3D printing as a substitute for buying Games Workshop miniatures. So at least we have one anecdote of this happening at the local store level, where at least the perception among the staff of the store was that 3D printed miniatures were cutting into their bottom line, and it wasn't going to be worth it to stock as much Warhammer in the face of 3D printing. So that's kind of the micro example, but if you think of that on a macro scale, you could imagine as 3D printing takes off more and more, we could see fewer and fewer sales of Games Workshop miniatures. Now, I'm not sure that's necessarily guaranteed. It could be that Warhammer 40k is... Oh, okay. Clear Sound of Jules says, I can't even begin to comment without going through going into the problems with publicly traded companies. All right, so you feel like it's a complex problem. Well, there is kind of another way to look at it, which is, what if this is not a big problem for Games Workshop? It could be that, sure, more and more people are going to get into 3D printing, but that doesn't have to necessarily lead to a drop-off or a complete loss of Games Workshop sales. Myself, I do both. I purchase Games Workshop models frequently, spend quite a bit of money on Games Workshop models bought from the company, or bought secondhand on eBay, which I guess sort of maintains the value of Games Workshop models in the used market. And now and again, my friend 3D prints me a model or a few models. And usually I would say that the models that my friend 3D prints for me are not models that I was going to go out and buy. So it's more like a supplement to my collection. And I primarily think of my collection as a collection of Games Workshop miniatures, but that I also have a few proxy models that are 3D printed to use alongside my collection. So that's kind of the way I look at it. And if that's more what's happening or what's going to happen, then you could think of it as a rising tide that lifts all ships. That is, the amount of 3D printed stuff is increasing, but it might increase right along with an increase in Games Workshop sales. That Warhammer 40k is becoming more and more popular. Some people can't afford the miniatures and are interested in 3D printing them, while the people who can afford Games Workshop miniatures prefer to buy them from Games Workshop for one reason or another, and ultimately will keep the company not just afloat, but ever more and more successful. So either one of those possibilities, I would say, could happen, or it may be that we see kind of a mix of both, where Games Workshop or Warhammer 40k may continue to grow in popularity, but miniature sales are not what they could have been because 3D printing is sort of absorbing some of what would have been miniature sales. And Games Workshop does fine, but not as well as they could have in the absence of 3D printed alternatives. So one issue or one subject I want to discuss tonight is what is Games Workshop going to do about this, or what could they do about this? But we can also talk a little bit about more about what is happening and what are other people and other designers doing. Let me pick my next color here. I think we'll try this Screaming Skull here. I guess one thing is, even if people 3D print their miniatures, they still need to paint them, at least for now, until full color 3D printing is really here in a big way. And so Games Workshop could still be selling Citadel paints to people who 3D print miniatures. And I guess, in fact, there's lots of things that people who 3D print miniatures still are buying from Games Workshop. But I guess the question is which of those are sort of immune to the similar issue. So if you are 3D printing your miniatures, you may still be buying your paints from Games Workshop. Or you might be going with more affordable alternatives like Army Painter or Vallejo paints. You probably are still buying your rule books and codexes from Games Workshop. However, we are now seeing some alternatives to buying codexes and rule books. We have the Russian website Wahapedia, which is basically pirating Games Workshop's rules and codex rules and publishing them for free on the internet, which seems like kind of a little bit, I mean, it does seem like piracy, but it also seems like almost a kind of an intellect, like a sort of IP warfare between Russia and the United Kingdom, as I imagine that they're partly doing it to literally to hurt Games Workshop. I have to wonder, or is it simply for out of the goodness of their hearts to make the game playable for people who can't afford a new codex every 2 years and a new rulebook every 2 years and a new campaign book every 6 months, which is bound to be a lot of people. So if you were trying not to give your money to Games Workshop, at this point you could be getting your game rules from Wahapedia, your army rules from Battlescribe, your miniatures 3D printed, and your army rules from I guess I said army rules from Battlescribe, and your paints from Army Painter, for instance. So I guess that's kind of part of a bigger discussion of how does Games Workshop remain profitable when everything that they are selling can be gotten somewhere else cheaper or for free. But I guess specifically today we're trying to talk about miniatures and the 3D printing angle. But I suppose it is part of a wider discussion, or could be. Maybe that's a subject for another live stream discussion. Alright, painted a couple Deathwing helmets there. Oh, I know what I should do is some Dark Angels green. How do you decide what is a fair model price? Says Clear Sound of Jewels. Well, good question. I think partly it's determined by the competition. So you could look at what are other designers charging for their 3D printable models. As far as Games Workshop, they could look at what are other games charging, or other companies charging for their 3D or for their actual cast miniatures. You could look at what is the overall cost to develop and sell the miniature. So Games Workshop could look at how much are we paying our designers, how much does it cost to ship our product around the world, to package it, to produce the game, and then simply set the price of the miniatures, whatever it needs to be to keep the business afloat. And to some extent, it's just going to be whatever the market will bear. So they keep raising their prices and raising their prices until they feel like they've raised them too high and not enough, people can afford them. Basically, they want to sell out all their stock at the highest price they can get. And so if their sales drop because their prices are too high, they need to lower them. And as long as their sales are keeping up, they keep raising them. And it seems to be their philosophy. But ultimately, with something like this, it's kind of hard to give an objective answer. Basically, whatever people will pay. And then there's also the issue of rising inequality. Certainly a big issue here in the United States, but also around the world, where the people who are really doing well right now, say bringing home over $100,000 a year, can afford to pay $55 for a box of 10 miniatures, and they could probably afford to pay $100 for a box of 5 miniatures. So it's almost like there's some people for whom money is no object, and they could afford very high prices because they have tons of money, while the majority of people have less and less money relative to, accounting for inflation. So I would say that that's an issue that is more of an issue for Games Workshop than maybe for individual designers who are selling STLs and that kind of thing. Because Games Workshop, almost no matter how much they raise their prices, there's going to be some people who can afford it no problem, can afford their products without any issues. But a lot of people are already finding Games Workshop to be prohibitively expensive. And I would say that a lot of them are the ones who are really fueling the 3D printed renaissance, if you will. See, we've got a few little skulls I could paint this bone color. So if you think about someone whose hobby budget is maybe like $100 a year, that would be maybe like 2 Games Workshop kits. That person would be pretty tempted to get into 3D printing because they could spend their hobby budget for the year on a 3D printer, buy, say, a used 3D printer for $100. And then the next year they could print 200, 300 miniatures instead of buying 2 kits containing 20 miniatures. So from the standpoint of the consumer, the 3D printing route is really much more appealing if affordability is your problem. And I would say that Games Workshop isn't really catering to the people who are struggling to afford their games. They seem to just not worry too much about those people. And I would say a lot of them have turned to playing Tabletop Simulator. So Tabletop Simulator is a computer game that lets you create replicas of basically any board game. And people have taken scans of 3D models or of Games Workshop minis and basically created entire replica armies of Warhammer within the tabletop simulator app. Clear Sound of Jewels. I don't really take the company's cost into my purchasing decisions. I look at it like a joy to dollar ratio. If the cost is higher than the joy return, I'll probably print it. Yeah, I could see that. Seems like that really comes into play with something like a Titan. The Titans made by Forge World are like 3 feet tall, some of them, maybe the biggest ones, but are maybe somewhere between a foot tall and 3 feet tall. And they sell for hundreds of pounds, so in some cases over $500 US, which is really a prohibitive price for someone like me. But you might be able to 3D print a miniature like that for, I don't know, $20 worth of resin. And it would be, I guess, take some time and skill and work to 3D print and clean up and assemble a model like that. But it would be a lot of fun to have a Titan. It just wouldn't be enough fun to justify the cost for me. Now, I have bought 2 Forge World models secondhand. I got, well, actually, I guess the Baneblade kit is made by Games Workshop now. But I do have a Baneblade, and this last year I got a used Falchion, which is a super heavy tank for Space Marines. And they both brought me a ton of joy, but they cost so much that I'm not sure it was... I'm still not sure it was worth it. But I know what you mean about the cost to joy ratio. Well, let's see. What are we going to paint next on this guy? I was thinking of doing some red helmets, maybe for Tech Marines. Let's do that. Checking my notes here. Oh, I did want to give a shout out. I was discussing this topic before the stream to get some ideas on Friendly Pyro's stream. If you're watching on Twitch, Friendly Pyro is a really fun painter to chat with. His channel name, Friendly Pyro, has 2 underscores between the words. So friendly __ pyro, Pyro. And it was very fun talking about it for a few minutes with him. And he basically said that the important thing when you're, or at least the only obstacle when distributing your 3D printed STLs that are sort of inspired by Games Workshop or could serve as proxies, is to not make any reference to any of the copywritten Games Workshop IPs. So you can't use the word orcs, you know, ORKS. You can't use the word squigs. Can't say Warhammer. Of course, can't say Games Workshop. You know, basically you have to avoid all of these terms that they have copyright on. And he pointed out that one of the companies that's doing this very well is Gear Guts Mech Shop. So Gear Guts Mech Shop has a website, and you can order basically orc models, but they don't use the word orc anywhere. I think they call them bruisers with 2 O's, and they might use some of the same lingo as Games Workshop, like boss, but only really sort of generalized terms. Clear Sound of Jewels. I don't think anybody is getting a complete army for $30 of resin with the sheer amount of trial and error necessary to dial in a print. I don't know. I saw a post on Facebook where someone said, I think $15, $20, showing off a army of maybe 40 orcs. So it can definitely get down there if you're a skilled printer. But I can understand the motivation to say that. Yeah, well, I was trying not to pull that number out of nowhere. If anything, I was trying to guess a bit high, as I
didn't exactly remember exactly the number I saw. Well, there we got a couple Tech Marines hanging out on the back of the base here. Wonder if we should do one that's like a Blood Angel. Or maybe that's enough red. Oh, we should do another one or two yellow helmets, maybe. And did we get enough Dark Angels? There's 2 on there. This kind of looks like it could also be a Tech Marine. But do I really want to do 3 of them all next to each other? Probably not. I don't think that one was supposed to be a Tech Marine. Oops. So let's see, what are some other companies that are doing this similar thing of creating miniatures that are sort of Games Workshop-esque or Warhammer 40k proxy type companies? We've got Cromlech, of course. I would say, is it Victoria Miniatures or Victoria Limited? I think it's Victoria Miniatures, does some really beautiful ones. Anvil Industries. These are just off the top of my head, pretty much. I do use some proxies from other games that look nothing like any Games Workshop miniature, but are kind of fun to proxy. And specifically from the game Wrath of Kings. And this is an out-of-print game now, but you can still find the miniatures for sale here and there. And I love using some Wrath of Kings miniatures in my Drukhari army as my grotesques. And my reasoning was that I don't really like the design of the grotesques for Warhammer. They're basically kind of like soldiers made from like torture victims on steroids kind of thing. So like their flesh is peeled off, they've got tubes going in and out of their skin everywhere, and they have like masks grafted onto their faces, that kind of thing. And I'm just not a fan of the kind of violent, grotesque kind of torture aesthetic. And so I wanted to do something different for my grotesques, and I wanted to maybe use like an alien race, something from the Warhammer universe that, or could be from the Warhammer universe that you don't see too often, to kind of make it feel like there's more sort of alien variety in the game. And I was looking at old Rogue Trader models, and I discovered the Saharduin, which is spelled like Saharduin. And the Saharduin are also called Piscean warriors, and they're basically like fish people. And they have sort of like shark tails, and they have sort of a cross between human and kind of dolphin type features. And so I thought it would be really fun to do some Saharduin warriors as my grotesques. But Games Workshop didn't really, they only ever created a single miniature for them way back in the Rogue Trader days. And I looked on their, on like a wiki, and apparently the planets that Saharduin come from are like ocean worlds. And these ocean worlds are so difficult for the Imperium to conquer because although Space Marines can fight underwater, they're not necessarily going to defeat an army of highly advanced fish people underwater. And so basically the Imperium simply lays siege to Saharduin worlds with their space fleets and just kind of forgets about them. So it seemed appropriate that my Drukhari could sort of get past these Imperium blockades and get some Saharduin off of their planets and in exchange have them basically act as gladiator type warriors for them. And I found the perfect models in Wrath of Kings for a faction called Hadros, which is kind of a undersea kind of faction. And I found some like Hadros Sharkman warriors that were just pretty much perfectly what I was looking for. And I really love how they look. I did kit bash them a bit with some Games Workshop parts. So I have some, basically I gave each one kind of a flesh gauntlet type weapon on one hand, using Drukhari spear tips and stuff like that. And I'm very happy with them. They're a lot of fun. So there's also that that's been going on for a while, of just finding a proxy that, even if it's not exactly like a Games Workshop miniature, it's just like a fun thing to use in your army, even though it looks rather different. Oh yeah, let's do this guy's claws. Needed to do some touch-up on there. So I'd say the sort of Games Workshop-like, or Warhammer-like, started with, oh yeah, Privateer Press. That's the company that makes Hordes and War Machine. And then I guess there was Wrath of Kings, which is now out of print. Let's see, does he have some teeth I should paint? Oh, he does. And then we got into the companies that sort of basically make stuff that seems specifically intended to be proxies for Games Workshop, like Cromlech and Victoria Miniatures and Anvil Industries, to name a few. Oh, I think one is called, another one is called Raging Heroes. But a lot of them make some really fantastic miniatures. And I have noticed that there seem to be more sort of small scale companies like that now. One might be called something like Troll Traders out of New Zealand or Australia or something. Just ordered a very cool miniature from them. Guess it's not right here on my desk. And I guess we're not really going to get into actual recasting, which is a thing. Mostly you see recasting is basically illegal, as it's directly copying Games Workshop intellectual property for sale and distribution. And recast companies seem to operate out of like China and Russia, where they're basically like out of the reach of Games Workshop lawsuits, I guess. China is kind of known for breaking international IP law at this point, I would say. But that's not really pertinent to this discussion, as we're more or less talking about legal alternatives to buying Games Workshop miniatures here. So we talked about Gear Guts Mech Shop and these other companies that are making stuff that's like Games Workshop proxies, pretty much. And we touched on Tabletop Simulator, where you can pretty much play a digital recreation of Warhammer 40k. And you do still need your own rule books and stuff, I guess. But all the miniatures and dice are simulated inside the game. And it's basically free once you buy the actual video game. And we kind of touched on the companies that are publishing Games Workshop rules for free, like Wahapedia and Battle Scribe. So now let's get into what is Games Workshop going to do about this issue, or what can they do? And I think I'm going to paint some of these helmets black. Let's find my black. Here we go. Good old Abaddon black. There we are. So something that Friendly Pyro brought up as a possibility is that if 3D printing quality becomes good enough and 3D printing becomes cheap enough, Games Workshop might simply switch from casting plastic and metal and resin miniatures to 3D printing their miniatures. And on the one hand, that could potentially lower their costs. However, I don't see that it would ever lower their costs below what it costs individuals to 3D print knockoffs, if as it were. Because basically Games Workshop is still having to pay their rules writers, their miniature designers, and if they were 3D printing their miniatures at a workshop or a studio or whatever, or a manufacturing plant, they still have to worry about distributing those miniatures around the world, packaging, marketing costs, shipping costs, and all that. So, yes, it's possible that they may be able to 3D print their miniatures very affordably at some point in the future. Maybe they're even at the point now where they could be saving money by 3D printing miniatures instead of casting them in plastic. I don't think it's ever going to really solve this problem for them, because it will always be cheaper for someone to 3D print their own miniature at home rather than Games Workshop 3D print it and send it to a shop and sell it to them. So there's that issue. So what about Games Workshop simply selling the 3D printing file, the STL if you will, directly to the customer? Like, why don't they want to do that? And if you know anything about distributing digital files, you'll know that the answer is probably because of piracy and distribution by the consumer, which is if they sell a 3D printable STL of a Space Marine to one person, it's very hard to stop that one person from distributing that 3D printable file to hundreds or thousands of other people who can now get it for free from that person rather than buy it from Games Workshop. So that's kind of the problem that's preventing them from simply switching to simply selling files, which does seem like it could be one possible answer to this dilemma. Simply sell the files directly to the consumer. The consumer 3D prints their own miniatures, and Games Workshop can get out of the production and distribution business and simply focus on the designing the miniatures, marketing the game, writing the rules, updating the rules, and that kind of thing. And if you were going with that kind of a system, then presumably Games Workshop could also sell their rules digitally, where you have an app or you buy a digital file containing the rules, and or you visit a website where the rules are kept up to date. But that has the same problem where once you share the rules with one person, they could turn around and share them for free with other people. It's kind of the dilemma of marketing digital products. And I think that one possible solution to this is to kind of go the route that the music industry has gone, which is to come up with more secure types of digital files and marketplaces, which make it harder to share the material and then continue to prosecute anyone who shares it for free. But I would say that mostly it's a technological problem there of we don't necessarily have the digital file types that could be sold securely and not shared. Wow, my veins are really popping out of my arm. I was doing construction today, getting my workout. Working up on tops of ladders yesterday and today. Doing kind of like roof maintenance in order to install new gutters. We're working on a house that had decorative rafter tails that all needed to be cut so that the new gutter could go on the house. So I was working with a Sawzall, which is kind of like a heavy power saw up on top of a very tall ladder, cutting rafter tails. Felt kind of dangerous. Quit early yesterday because I got worn out. And today I was back up on the ladders, but just installing downspouts. Still pretty hard work. Alright, we're getting there. I think we pretty much blocked in the colors on all these helmets. Probably want to come in and add another layer to the red and the yellow at least. And then I think I'll do kind of like on this yellow one where I've got some gray painted over top of it once it's well and truly dry. So we may see a technological solution that allows Games Workshop to transition to selling STLs. And solution that Friendly Pyro suggested was that instead of selling the STLs directly to the consumer, we could see a transition where Games Workshop does create 3D printable STLs, but they only sell them to licensed miniature printers. So you have something like a 3D printing studio with basically what you'd call like a 3D printer farm, so dozens or hundreds of 3D printers, and those studios mass produce 3D printed Warhammer miniatures more cheaply and efficiently than Games Workshop can cast them, and then they get distributed to game stores from there. So that seemed like possible, something that could happen. Maybe I want to use a little bit of orange on these red helmets. And I guess another kind of possibility, which is sort of along those lines, is that Games Workshop could get out of the miniature producing business. And I think this is something that people have kind of speculated for a while that Games Workshop would like to do. And possibly because of the rise of 3D printing. But it's not too hard to imagine Games Workshop becoming more of a media company in the future. We've seen them start Warhammer Plus, where they have a subscription service where you get to watch Warhammer animations. And it seemed like they were trying to get people to subscribe to a Warhammer app that would take the place of the paper book codex, and it would have all your army rules on the app. And I think that players somewhat rightfully rebelled against this trend, because we've seen how once everybody's subscribed to an app or a subscription service, that then the company can basically just keep jacking up the price on that subscription service to milk the community for as much money as they can cough up. And at the point that you've committed to a monthly app subscription, it's very hard to basically stop. And that your sort of customer base becomes kind of prisoner to your app in a way that they're not if they have a paper book, where I mean, granted, Games Workshop has kept updating their rule books so that you do have to keep buying new ones, but I guess players could simply stop buying the new ones and keep playing the same codex or the same edition of the rules and simply ignore the new versions that keep coming out. And we have seen a bit of that happening where there's become kind of a thriving Warhammer 2nd Edition community that's playing an old edition of the game and probably not buying any new codexes that are coming out and that kind of thing. And of course, we have seen players who have pretty much switched 100% to using Wahapedia and Battlescribe. So it's definitely happening. Kind of a small, I would say a fairly small portion of the Warhammer community has somewhat rebelled against Games Workshop at this point. Which has been interesting to see. Although I use Wahapedia and Battlescribe, I would not say I'm necessarily part of that community, and that I still buy rulebooks, I still buy codex. So I more or less see those as like a supplement to everything else. Wonder if I should do a little bit of a gray highlight on these black helmets. Well, I think we'll just skip it until we come back and do a gray coating over everything to make it all look dusty. So I think that I'm happy with this little collection of helmets and such. Oh, I know. Let's do a little bit of silver on the black stuff to make it look like it's kind of scratched and scraped. And a little bit of bare metal is showing through. Hope I'm doing a good job of keeping the miniatures on cam today. Trying to focus on doing better at that. I should mention, while I remember it, that we finally started streaming Games of 40K on the channel. It was really kind of like my goal for 2022. And my resolution is to stream every month. But what's really exciting is that I've got so many games lined up. We're streaming actually almost every Saturday and Tuesday. So playing Warhammer 40K online for spectators is something I've been wanting to do for quite a while. And finally I'm doing it. And it's very exciting. And having a lot of fun doing that. My last game was against Mark and his Templar of the Broken Shard. Basically a counts as Black Templar Space Marine army. And we're in the middle of a 3-game set, my orcs against his Templar. And Mark is up 2-0. And so I'm hoping I can come back and win the 3rd game to keep my orcs in the fight. But very fun. I'm trying to sort of share my style of narrative gaming with the community, which is basically to have a bit of a narrative story for every game that we play, but to play the games with standard match play rules. And often that incorporates playing like best 2 out of 3, best sets of 5, and stuff like that. And having kind of a little bit of a like stakes within the campaign setting, like if, you know, so in the case of this game, or 3-game set between Templars and Orcs, if Mark wins all 3 games, he'll have successfully defended the planet Icarus 4 against the Orc attack. And the Orcs will be fought off of the planet, wiped out on Icarus 4, and he will either go on to attack them somewhere else in the system, or we'll switch and start playing a different matchup, maybe against my Genestealer Cult or Drukhari, for instance. So that's been a lot of fun. And have the next game scheduled for Saturday, day after tomorrow. And it's going to be my Dark Angels against new challenger playing Necrons. So tune in for that if you get the chance. We'll be playing around 3 p.m. Pacific time, Pacific US. And on Tuesdays, we're playing usually between 3 and 5 o'clock. We're starting our game somewhere in there. Well, I think I can go back and start to do some ink wash on this Chimera. I got those panels painted red, and I'm just going to do an ink wash of Nuln Oil and Agrax Earthshade to try to dirty them up to match the rest of the vehicle. So let's start with Agrax Earthshade. My favorite color of wash. Just gotta try not to tip over the pot. Games Workshop ink wash pots are notoriously easy to tip over. We'll see if I can keep this huge model on cam pretty well. So I have generally felt like buying Games Workshop recasts is somewhat unethical because it is a form of intellectual property theft. You have someone basically reproducing Games Workshop miniatures and not giving any money to Games Workshop and keeping all the profit from selling that miniature. And if I was the one holding the intellectual property rights, I would feel like that was stealing and cutting into my profits. And I have been pretty hesitant to buy any recasts or play with recasts on live stream, for instance. But I don't necessarily feel the same way about these sort of proxy models, in that you actually do have another designer putting quite a bit of time and effort into creating an original model. Now, granted, they're often taking inspiration, often very close inspiration from Games Workshop original, but at least you figure they are creating it completely from scratch. And so that somehow feels a little bit different to me and not quite as bad. Well, we got the first coat of ink wash on there. We probably want to let that dry before we come back and do another layer. I'm just kind of angling it to try to keep that from all puddling and pooling at the bottom of these panels. But some of that's okay. But I am kind of curious how people feel about the ethics of using proxy models or not necessarily recast, but proxy models designed to look similar and be usable in 40K. Do you feel like it's unethical to create or sell or buy these kinds of proxy models or 3D printable STLs? If you're watching this on YouTube, leave your opinion in the comments. And subscribe while you're at it. Alright, give him a nice red tongue there. Alright, I think we've improved him a bit. We'll come back and work on the helmets in a minute. I think maybe should I leave this upside down to dry? Or no, I'll just use my brush to kind of spread this ink wash around a little bit. There we go. All right, maybe we'll finish up the nameplate on good old Adrian the Locust here. I painted it silver and just needs a black ink wash to kind of dirty it up. I like my nameplates for Genestealer Cult to be very dark and dingy. So here's our Nuln Oil wash, or a shade paint, I guess. And I'll go kind of heavy with this. And just going to kind of dab it into the corners and across the text. And we're done. So, kind of along the lines with Games Workshop becoming more of a media company who creates the rules for 40K and updates the codexes, but doesn't create the miniatures. There you go. That's how that's looking. There is kind of a interesting historical analog we can look at, which is 3rd edition Dungeons and Dragons. Now, Wizards of the Coast, who produces Dungeons and Dragons, back in the day, probably very late 90s, early 2000s, I guess, when they were publishing 3rd edition Dungeons and Dragons, they had a very daring idea to make the game open source. And they actually allowed other companies to produce compatible rules and books and, I assume, miniatures for use with 3rd edition Dungeons and Dragons. And they called this open source system the D20 system, if I remember. And I think this is actually the system that led to the creation of Pathfinder, which became almost like a popular alternative to Dungeons and Dragons when they changed everything up and created 4th edition. People who didn't like 4th edition and liked 3rd edition better, many of them changed over to playing Pathfinder, which was basically still 3rd edition Dungeons and Dragons, using the D20 system, which was open source, but it had its own rule book and all of its own character classes and that kind of thing. So that was quite interesting to see, and I can't imagine Games Workshop doing it just because of how tightly they try to control their IP. But I don't think there's anything to stop Games Workshop from literally opening up their IP to allow other people to create miniatures and sell them for use with Warhammer 40K. And it could be the kind of thing where, as more and more people get into designing and distributing 3D printable models for 40K, Games Workshop might sell more and more rule books and more Black Library novels and that kind of thing. So I could imagine that kind of system could work out in their favor, and they could put less effort and money into designing and distributing miniatures, and to some extent let the community take over that aspect of their business. And then you would see them starting to become more of a media company, making their money off of cartoons and movies and animations and subscription service, and potentially selling rule books and that kind of thing. Of course, I have wished for a long time that Games Workshop would actually have a website like Wahapedia, where they would simply compile all the up-to-date rules in one place for free. I don't think it would cost them a crazy amount. They would only have to employ 1 or 2 web developers and pay for hosting of a website. None of that is very expensive. It would probably cost Games Workshop, $1,000 a year to provide the rules free to everybody. And they only need to figure out how to recoup that amount of money to keep that sustainable. But of course, right now they really kind of make, I think they make a lot of money selling rule books and codexes. And it's kind of their bread and butter, I would assume, that they don't want to part with that income. But it seems also to be kind of at risk in this new technological ecosystem that we're entering. I guess his knife is looks cool. Maybe we'll go silver. Alright, just working on these grots from eBay. If the person who sold these and painted them is out there, thank you. I really like what you've done with them. Trying to just make them look a little more in line with the rest of my army without totally redoing all your lovely paint work. That would be really something if Warhammer ever went open source. I could see the fans really loving that. I think it would create a lot of goodwill in the community to have all these people who are creating sort of Warhammer proxy STLs to be able to sort of come out of the shadows and become a valued and legitimate part of the community. Would be really neat, and I think that it would kind of enhance the longevity of the game, because all these people producing miniatures for Warhammer would become incentivized to keep the game alive. But I guess we have seen a company basically create an alternative to the Games Workshop rules. And I'm talking about the Grimdark Future rules created by, I guess they're on onepagerules.com. And this is basically a third party who has created rules which can be played with Games Workshop miniatures or any of these third-party miniatures. I assume with almost any miniatures you could choose. And where Games Workshop is becoming, their rules have become increasingly complicated and convoluted, Grimdark Future, I believe, boils the rules down to a single page. And I assume that it's just the game rules which are a single page, and then you have stuff like sort of equivalent to the Army Codex, which are spread out among, or maybe those are each one page as well. I haven't actually played it or looked at the rules, but I've been hearing some talk about it, and it sounds really quite interesting and creative. So if you already have a big collection of Games Workshop miniatures and you are sort of disillusioned with Games Workshop and their constant need to upgrade to new codex and new rules again and again, you do now have an alternative, which is to switch to the Grimdark Future game system, and then you're theoretically freed from having to rely on Games Workshop rules. We also talked about the option of playing an older edition of the rules, where you no longer have to buy every new codex that comes out. Well, there are actually also some companies that are creating 3D printable strategy games from the ground up to incorporate 3D printing. And the one that jumped out at me, I know there's others I'm sure that I'm not aware of, but the one I want to talk about is Pocket Tactics. So Pocket Tactics is, I think, actually an open source game created by Ill-Gotten Games. And it's not exactly related to Warhammer 40k. The miniatures are on a smaller scale, so they're not the same size as Games Workshop miniatures. But what's interesting about it is it seems like anyone who wants to can create an army, and by army I mean like a set of 3D printable miniatures for use in the Pocket Tactics game. And I assume that they also could legally sell them. and it looks like a very fun and interesting and creative game. It's played on a hex grid, which you actually build as part of the game. So you have like little hex pieces which you put together to create the game board that you're going to fight over. And then you have a huge variety of different armies with very different sort of flavor of each one for use in the game. So you might have one person playing dwarves and the other person's playing undead, but you could also have factions that are like space settlers or dragons or modern humans or whatever. So Pocket Tactics looks very fun and interesting, and they've kind of gone the travel game route where the actual miniatures are all so tiny that you could literally put them in your pocket or bring them in the backseat of a car to play on a road trip or something like that. So I wanted to give kind of a shout out to Pocket Tactics as a game which is basically designed from the beginning to incorporate 3D printing and to not really worry about people creating their own miniatures and selling their own miniatures for use in the game. That seems to be part of the idea. Hey, Warp Zone Gaming, good to see you. Welcome. What up, dude? Stopping in real quick to say hello before bed. Well, hey, I really appreciate it. We're just discussing the future of Games Workshop and 3D printing and companies that have designed their games to be used with 3D printing, companies that produce, proxy miniatures to be used in Games Workshop games and that kind of thing. And I'm working on clearing my painting desk, basically. So taking some half-finished models and just trying to get them across the finish line tonight. Oh, you're listening for a moment. Sounds cool. All right. Well, we'll be putting... all the episodes are going up on YouTube after the fact, so if you want to catch up on the discussion later, you can always check out Challenger Tabletop channel on there. And hope you have a great night. Feel free to stick around or catch you next time. We'll be painting again tomorrow. And we're going to be playing Warhammer 40k live Saturdays and Tuesdays, starting kind of that afternoon to evening Pacific time. We'll be aiming for 3 o'clock sharp on Saturdays. And I think Warp Zone Wargaming, you have a Discord I'm a member of, I think. Yeah. Aren't you part of the Alliance of Blood and Brush? Really appreciate your Discord. And today I'm painting some grots and some stuff for Genestealer Cult and some stuff for Imperial Guard. So Pocket Tactics, have you heard of that? And would you ever play it? Oh, hey, we got a first time chat from Mortis Obscura. I need your money, Warp Zone Wargaming, I need your money for backroom brush order. Oh, and Warp Zone Wargaming is going to be live tomorrow. Very cool. Have any of you guys heard of Pocket Tactics? Or are there any other 3D printable war games that are basically made to be 3D printed from the ground up? Because that's something I'm curious about. And it's actually something I've wanted to do. I have designed a few board game prototypes myself over the years. And I would really like to get into designing them for 3D printing so people could pretty much print the entire game at home, print off the rules, and have a complete game without ever having to go to a store. And I have done some 3D printable miniature designing, but mostly as a hobby. I'm a big fan of the old 90s board game Hero Quest, which has just been re-released as part of a crowdfunding campaign by Hasbro. And so before the game was re-released, pretty much the only way to get a complete edition of Hero Quest was to either 3D print the pieces or else go out and track down multiple copies of the game, since almost all of them would be missing some parts. And so I don't know if you guys have played Hero Quest, but so let's see. Warp Zone Wargaming says, although not having a 3D printer, not much I can do with it. Oh yeah, well, I feel like pretty much everybody knows somebody with a 3D printer. I also don't have one, but I have a friend who is willing to print me stuff when I ask him nicely. And so I designed some miniatures for Hero Quest based on the original miniatures, where I would take somebody's scan of the original miniature and change out the weapons or armor equipment. And basically I was trying to make it so that whatever loadout you had on your hero, you could print off a miniature that would exactly have the right equipment on it. So I designed probably about 100 designs on Thingiverse. My Thingiverse account is called Ninja Wolf Hybrid, if you want to look it up. And it was a lot of fun, but I at least do have some experience now creating 3D printable designs. So I really want to push forward with some of those ideas, but I don't know if it'll be right away. But it's on my to-do list. Alright, let's get another coat of ink wash on this Chimera. I'm painting over the armor panels where I had Genestealer Cult icons to basically change it back from being Brood Brothers to being Imperial Guard again. As I've decided to create an Imperial Guard army out of my former Brood Brothers units. Hopefully I can kind of blend these panels in. They're really standing out like a sore thumb currently. That's starting to look a little better. Well, any thoughts on Games Workshop and 3D printing? Do you think Games Workshop's days of selling miniatures are numbered? Or do you think that the 3D printing market is really just sort of peripheral to Games Workshop's miniatures, and if anything, it kind of helps the sale of Games Workshop miniatures? I think I lean kind of toward the side that it probably has a negative impact on Games Workshop sales, but that at least for now the impact is somewhat limited, in that there's still a lot of people who don't have printers or access to one, and even the people who are 3D printing models probably are also still buying some models. And a lot of people, probably not a ton of people are switching to purely 3D printed. And the ones who are probably the people who can't really afford Games Workshop prices. So it's not like they would be spending hundreds of dollars on Games Workshop anyway, because they probably can't afford it. It's kind of my feeling. But I do think it's going to become more and more of an issue, positive or negative. If it does have an impact, I think the impact is going to increase as more and more people get printers or access to printers, and more cool designs find their way out there into the ecosystem. Like, you can already find some pretty good miniatures just on Thingiverse. Mortis, just hire me to print everything. Warp Zone Wargaming, I think they go hand in hand. I prefer Games Workshop mostly due to time constraints. Hard enough to find time to build and paint what I have. All the extra design and printer is a bit much for me. And Yes to what Mortis Obscura said. Yeah, for me, I would say that, at least for now, 3D printing is more of a peripheral thing where I buy Games Workshop miniatures, and most of my armies are mostly GW miniatures, but I have like maybe 5% of my army or less is 3D printed, or of my collection. Probably closer to like 2 to 3%. So although I have access to someone who can 3D print stuff for me, I still mostly just buy Games Workshop miniatures. Like you said, for the convenience, but also for liking the designs and partly for feeling like they're the official models. Mortis says, I'm the weirdo in the Discord who makes paints for restoration, by the way. Oh, interesting. Warp Zone Wargaming, but you love that the option is out there for those that have time and ability. Best part of Warhammer is having endless options. Yeah, I agree. Hey, we got a first-time chat. A little classy. I'm sitting at 80% 3D printed. Well, interesting. And yet, you still do have some official Games Workshop stuff. Are you still open to buying some Games Workshop stuff, Classy? Or would you say that now that you're mostly 3D printed, that's what you're going to stick with? Of course, have to support the local hobby shops. Well, there you go. So you're still open to getting some Games Workshop models to keep the company and the local game shops alive, but you supplement that with mostly 3D printed because it's cheaper, I assume, if not practically free. I did actually, in 2021, my sort of project of the year was my Orc army. And my original plan was to make that army 100% 3D printed. I'm not 3D printed, 100% scratch built. So, obviously scratch building is more time consuming than 3D printing. But basically my plan was to build a Orc army out of all vehicles, and to build the vehicles all out of like plasticard from scratch. Classy. I mean, the price is amazing, but I like the individuality of some of the 3D printed sculpts. Yeah, I hear that. There's really some cool options out there for having some 3D printed models. And like I was talking earlier about how for my Drukhari, I didn't really like the design of the grotesques being sort of like torture victim flayed characters. And so I wanted something a bit different, and I also wanted to sort of have some kind of aliens that made the universe feel bigger, not smaller. So I tracked down some Sharkman gladiators made for an out-of-print game called Wrath of Kings. And I find it's just like really fun to have something a bit different for my Drukhari. And it makes my army really unique, and it's fun sharing pictures with other Drukhari players to show them how I've got something really different, and they're always fun to put on the table, as I do feel like they make my army unique and they make the galaxy feel bigger, full of more strange, weird monsters. So I definitely hear you where 3D printing can create more fun options. Oh, Warp Zone, gotta go to bed. Enjoy the conversation. Wonderful stream. Hey, thank you very much. And Classy, I am sub to One Page Rules. Oh, cool. Which is such a nice, easy alternative to AOS and 40k. Now, normally I don't want to learn other game rules, but One Page sounds totally doable, so I hear you. And they're putting out some amazing sculpts. Oh, interesting. I wasn't really aware that One Page Rules had their own miniatures, but I guess that makes sense. I should look at their website a little closer. The other main one I use is Raging Heroes, Heroes Infinite, which is a company created by an ex-Games Workshop modeler. Oh, interesting. I mentioned Raging Heroes. I've definitely been keeping an eye on some of their models. I'm trying to think if I've actually bought any. I don't think I have yet. I was starting some stormtroopers for my Imperial Guard, basically Scions, but using the old Kasrkin sculpts. And I found two companies that have made like alternative Kasrkin character that totally fit with the old style, and I was super excited to pick those up. So I got an alternate Tempestus Prime, or Tempester Prime, and an alternate Tempestus, which is the leader of a Scion squad. And I really love the sculpts. Neither of them were 3D printed. They're both cast resin, but very happy to pick those up just to have some more variety. Like you say. One of the fun things you said is, I guess it was, who is it, Warp Zone Wargaming, saying it's fun having tons of options. So could you guys see Games Workshop becoming just a media company that puts out the rules and the lore, but has the game open source so other people can design the miniatures? It's hard to imagine them going that route because they clearly love to control their intellectual property so tightly. Or could you see them partnering with 3D printing studios that simply 3D print and distribute their miniatures for them so they can get out of the casting and distribution side of the game? Classy. They just started mid last year, I believe. OPR, that is. Are you able to refocus your paint cam? Oh, I can, yeah. Thanks for the heads up. I don't think they ever will, but if they were to provide a subscription model for their minis, it would boom their business. I could see that. Well, and a lot of companies have been, a lot of independent miniatures designers have been working on the challenge of distributing STLs securely and doing the work of getting takedown notices and stuff when people are sharing them illegally. All right, that looks like it's starting to really match as it dries. All right. I think that needs to dry a little more. I guess we're gonna keep working on goblins for a little longer here. Wonder if I want to do the skin a little more on these guys. I think they just have a dry brush of a single color. Let me see what Lauren Forest looks like on here. It's normally my highlight color for goblin flesh. Here's Lauren Forest. Looks like that's pretty close to the color that they're already painted. Maybe if I mix in just a little bit of yellow on that, it could work as a highlight color. I'd like to finish the base on this Genestealer Cult Patriarch that I've been working on with the Space Marine heads. And I'm just letting the ink wash dry on the helmets, and then I'll come in with some gray paint to kind of make it look like they're all dusty. Kind of like I have already on that yellow helmet in the front. So that's kind of my plan. I just want to let that dry a little more before I do that, and then we'll probably wrap up the stream after that. I also painted the nameplate on this pretty cool Genestealer Cult Locust, and named that after Adrian from Tabletop Titans down in California. Alright, so let's highlight some goblin skin. Gonna add just a little bit of yellow to this Lauren Forest, and that's making a nice highlight color for us. A little classy. Looks great though. Do you use oils? No, I actually just used good old Citadel paints. And I do get a lot of use out of their ink washes, which they call shade paints, I guess. I'll try to keep these guys in frame. And I know I saw at least one goblin whose ears were still painted black. I'll see if I can find him and fix that. And then I had a bunch of these goblins where when I was painting the base, I got red paint on their little green feet. And like this guy. You guys can probably see that. So I wanted to touch that up a little bit. I guess it's kind of fine, like they could have dirt and mud on their feet, but it's not exactly intentional, so let's correct that if I can. Are you guys doing any hobby stuff tonight? And also, if you guys play Warhammer 40k, what armies do you play? And also, just a heads up, we're going to be live streaming 40k on this channel on Saturdays and Tuesdays. So if you want to see some match play games with a focus on the narrative and some returning players coming back week after week to continue the narrative and play some best of 3, best of 5 type sets, should be a lot of fun. I've been having a blast live streaming 40k. Something I've been wanting to do for a long time. Yeah, this looks pretty good. Oh, okay. Classy says, just got my new inks in the mail 10 minutes ago. So breaking them out and doing some test minis before laying some paint on my Stormcast Eternals. Cool. So it sounds like you're a Age of Sigmar player. Did an episode the other day talking about all the different Games Workshop specialist games. Haven't really talked specifically about Age of Sigmar, although it's come up in almost every episode. I don't play Age of Sigmar. I was a Warhammer Fantasy player who was kind of disgruntled when Fantasy got discontinued, and I kind of swore never to play Age of Sigmar because, I didn't know if, well, anyway, mostly out of just spite for them having canceled Warhammer Fantasy. But I have thought about getting into Blood Bowl. And I have heard now that Warhammer Fantasy might be making kind of a return as Warhammer Old World or something like this. Or is it just called Old World? So that was kind of interesting. And I've also seen that they now have a skirmish game set in the Age of Sigmar universe called Warcry. I was kind of like vaguely aware of Warcry without really knowing what it was. And it sounds like it would be kind of a cheaper way to get into the Age of Sigmar world. Although I don't know if the miniatures are literally shared between Warcry and Age of Sigmar. It seems like they have sort of different miniature sets. Mainly, says Classy. Alright. But actually I have some friends who have gotten into Age of Sigmar. I think one is a girl who worked at Haunted Mansion at Disney World. And so she's collecting the night haunts, I think, and painting them. I don't know if they've played the game yet, though, or if they're just painting the miniatures. And then I think her husband picked up another army. But off the top of my head, I'm not sure which one. And I'm hoping to have him on stream soon to play. Mark plays several armies now for 40k. I got him started with some of my Dark Angels. And then since then, he's gotten into Necrons and Grey Knights. I think that's it. Now, wait a minute. I think he might have even been talking about picking up some... what do you call them? Thousand Suns, even. Ali Classy a little classy says Nighthaunt is my second army that's GW. Okay, so it sounds like you play Stormcast and Nighthaunts. That's cool. I was in a Games Workshop store the other day as the Games Workshop employee was describing Age of Sigmar to a new player who I think was familiar with 40K. So he was describing Stormcast Eternals as basically the Space Marines of Age of Sigmar, which I think I could see how that was almost like a conscious decision on Games Workshop part to have a kind of a almost Space Marine like faction. But it was interesting to hear him talk about it because I wasn't really aware of the Stormcast Eternals lore, but I got kind of a quick little primer just by listening to him talk about it, where it says he says I think the Stormcast Eternals are made by sort of imbuing a suit of armor with somebody's ghost, and maybe there's like a bunch of like rituals and stuff that are performed, and like each Stormcast Eternal is like super important, like badass immortal warrior, almost like the amount of training and technology that goes into creating a Space Marine, but in a fantasy setting. That was kind of interesting. Are we staying in focus on cam? Giving it my best shot. All right, well, let's see if we... Oh, okay, yeah. A little classy says, yup, and it's called The Forging. Cool. Let's see if I left anything out here. I guess the only thing I sort of quickly touched on but didn't really talk about very much is just that it seemed like Warhammer Plus came out of this Games Workshop looking towards the future of 3D printing and the end of miniature production. And that Warhammer Plus was kind of their first attempt to create a new business model that was not reliant on selling and producing miniatures, and would be more focused on distributing media like animations. And I think Warhammer Plus is also the app that can replace a codex. I don't have it, so I don't know off the top of my head, but I think that Warhammer Plus is also like a Battlescribe type app where you would subscribe to it as a monthly service instead of buying a codex every year. So if a codex costs you, say, $40, $40 to $50, I don't know exactly. I think that's, maybe there's some more like 35, but say just for the sake of argument that a codex costs you $50 new hardback, and you play 4 armies like I do, or actually I guess I'm going to be playing 5 once I get my Imperial Guard up and running, which I already needed an Imperial Guard codex to play my Brood Brothers for my Genestealer cult. So say you're buying 5 codex a year, that's $250 spent on $50 books, and they want you to switch to paying $5 a month for an app. How much would that save me? A little classy says, yes, it's an awesome backstory. That's cool. It's nice when they have good lore for your faction and for your game. And I'd say that's like the one strength of Warhammer is like nobody can compete with the quality and quantity of the Warhammer lore. Between the Horus Heresy book series, the great writers like Dan Abnett who have contributed, and the number of players who are interested in the lore and enjoy talking about it. But you can tell they made an effort with Warhammer Fantasy and Age of Sigmar to create some quality lore, I think. How many Gretchen am I working on here. I think we got about 25 here off of eBay. And they've been sitting on my painting desk for weeks, so I'm basically just trying to clear the desk. There we go. They're going to be part of my Goths orc army. So I think that idea of switching to an app could save me a lot of money if it meant I didn't have to buy Codex anymore. But as soon as, you know, my phone dies and I'm no longer subscribed to the app, or there's an EMP goes off, or what have you, I basically lose, or if Games Workshop goes under as a company, I basically lose access to the app. Whereas if I bought books, I still have the books and I could theoretically still play the game in the ruins of the future world. You know, so it's like, to some extent, you know, a book is a more secure investment than a subscription to an app. And then the other kind of big reason that the app isn't very appealing to me is the feeling like as soon as they have everybody subscribed to the app, they're going to start jacking up the price to see how much money they can squeeze out of the community. And just they'll look at the app subscribers as pretty much just a guaranteed income source that can be milked for however much money they arbitrarily decide they want. So I don't really like the idea of being handcuffed to a subscription service where, you know, they could raise it to $10 a month, then $15 a month, then $30 a month until it eventually reaches some point where I can no longer afford to stay subscribed to it. So that's kind of like what I'm afraid of as far as subscribing to an app. That something would happen where I would lose it, and you know, all that money I'd invested in app subscriptions would suddenly become worthless. It would be discontinued, replaced, or they would just jack up the price endlessly until I couldn't afford it anymore. Those are kind of my main concerns. And in general, I try not to, you know, subscribe to a ton of subscription services. I have someone who's sharing a Netflix account with me, but I really try not to subscribe to anything, just because, you know, that's money flowing out of your pocket every month without having any real intention involved or any conscious decision, except to stay subscribed, I guess. So do you guys also feel like you don't want to be subscribed to a subscription service? Or do you feel like it's the way of the future and that books and having to distribute printed books is like a waste of money and paper that really should be done away with? A Little Classy says, I agree. So I assume you're agreeing with my opposition to a subscription app. And I think, you know, my feeling would be kind of different if it was like a free app. Like, you know, I definitely enjoy using Battlescribe. And if Games Workshop had a free app like Battlescribe and they stopped printing new codexes but kept updating the app, you know, I guess I wouldn't really have any objection to that. My objection is mostly with trying to get the whole customer base hooked on an app and then being able to jack up the price on it. Even $5 a month adds up. I mean, I know a lot of people have habits like fast food or Starbucks coffee or something that make a $5 app seem like not so bad. But I've tried to cut all that other stuff out. I do drink Starbucks coffee at home. I buy pounds of coffee at the grocery store, or if I have to at a Starbucks shop, then I grind it myself at home and make it in my own espresso machine. But that seems like one of the pleasures in life I really enjoy. I worked at Starbucks for many years, so it'd be hard for me to quit coffee completely. But I have quit fast food in the last year. In 2021, I managed to stop going to fast food 3 or 4 times a week. And now pretty much the only times I have it are if I'm working construction and I need to take a lunch. And I haven't gotten to the habit of bringing my own lunch yet, so I'll get fast food when I'm at work. If, I'm nowhere near my house usually, so it's just the most convenient option, but it adds up. Probably still spending $30 a month at least on fast food just from work lunches. But if I'm working near my house, I just come home and make my own dinner. Trying to eat very affordably. Stuff like, frozen chicken breast, beans and rice. And I learned how to make my own bread. And I use sourdough to make my own pizza dough, flatbread, bread loaves, English muffins, all that kind of stuff. So that's stuff that I have been able to stop buying. Trying to be efficient with my money, but still been spending money on Games Workshop miniatures, but I've managed to at least stop getting miniatures on eBay when I work my overnight shift. I'm going to try to put a pause on my Warhammer purchases till I can get all my debts paid off at least. And I've certainly got enough stuff to paint to keep me busy on live stream for several months. So I think I can justify quitting my Warhammer purchase hobby. Just buy paints probably for a few months, if not the whole year. Oh, hey, Mortis Obscure wants to know which inks Classy got. Classy says Liquitex Muted set. Mortis says, I've been here. Yeah, you've just been quiet. Are you doing hobby stuff, Mortis? And what games and factions do you play? Oh, you're at work. Cool. All right. Neat. Thanks for putting me on as work entertainment. I work overnight at a hotel a few times a week, so I enjoy checking out hobby stuff while I'm doing that. But I would like to start spending some of that time doing creative writing, which is one of my interests. Oh, I just spilled a bunch of flake white, so dealing with that. Oh no. Oh, interesting. Are you getting to do some painting at work, or what is flake white? I guess if you're in the middle of cleaning something up, I don't need to be distracting you. Looks like we just got 4 more goblins to do a little touch up on, and then we'll skip back to the Patriarch and try and finish him up. Flake white is made from lead. Interesting. No, I don't really know what flake white is. When I was growing up, I inherited a bunch of lead miniatures from my older brother. The old Dungeons and Dragons, like Ral Partha miniatures from the 80s. And he taught me that whenever you handle lead miniatures, you need to wash your hands afterwards. And that lead is toxic. And then one time my dad helped me melt a lead miniature, which I'm sure was not smart, as we were probably inhaling lead as we pretty much just boiled it in a pot in the kitchen. So that was probably Probably a mistake. Not good parenting from Dad at that time. Oh no, Mortis Obscura. I tripped over a can of Shields Green, so I'm having a great day. Oh no. I had a rough day yesterday. Yesterday was the first day I skipped my live stream, my scheduled live stream, because I've been live streaming painting Wednesday, Thursday, Friday for pretty much a couple months now. And yesterday I was working construction, putting up gutters, and I was working at the top of a tall ladder using a Sawzall, which is kind of a heavy power saw, to trim rafter tails on a building, where I was like working up on the pretty much the top of the second story of the building, 30 some feet off the ground, and it felt pretty hazardous, like you're working above a sidewalk. If you fall that 30 feet, land on your neck, you could end up paralyzed or something. And as I got tireder in the day, I felt like I reached a point where I just didn't want to keep doing that. And I told my coworker, I'm done doing this. Unfortunately, that meant he had to do the rest of it, but I went home early, and I was really beat. Carrying that heavy saw up and down the ladder and my tool belt and everything, it really took it out of me yesterday. So took a nap, and I just didn't have the energy to do my live stream when I woke up from it. Obscura, I'm just lucky I didn't crash into the Minium, which is made from mercury. Oh my. Wow, sounds like you work around some toxic elements. Lead and mercury. I hope you're being safe about fumes and that kind of stuff. Hopefully your company has some good safety measures in place. My dad has lung problems. In his left lung, it's like they don't know what caused it, but it's like he's lost function in most of his left lung. And he said that when he was younger, he was exposed to various sort of hazardous fumes and stuff where he should have been more careful. I don't know if that would have been maybe in the military or at a company or what, but it's no joke. Got to be careful. Take care of your health, especially around those kind of toxic heavy metals and stuff. I eventually, I think, returned all the lead miniatures to my brother for Christmas a year or two ago, if I remember right. Unless I still have some of them. Mortis Obscura, very. This is art restoration in a nutshell. LOL, safety. Oh, man. My mom had a book on the bookshelf that was all about the hazards to artists from various materials in their paints and stuff like that. Sounds like might be a good one for you to check out. I wonder if I can remember what it was called. Art Can Kill You or something like that? No, I don't remember. It was too long ago, but I bet that book would still be pretty relevant to your industry. Art restoration. That's really sounds like an interesting field, Mortis. Good field for a Warhammer or miniature enthusiast, as you probably get to use a lot of the same skills you use, I don't know, stripping models and painting miniatures. Art restoration. I have visited a book restoration shop before when I was in Italy. That was quite interesting. I've done also book binding and that kind of stuff as a art practice. Oh, you probably have that book. Good. All right, there's the last grot touched up. Highlighted, I guess. I really like how he looks. Looks a little dim and dark on the camera here, but in person he looks like he's got a little more character. All right, I think time to just wrap up the Genestealer Cult Patriarch here. And you can see the ink wash on the various helmets around his base. And I just want to come in with some gray, watered down gray paint and kind of give them all a once over to make them look kind of dusty. Like the kind of basing I'm doing on these guys is this sort of gray sand and rocks and rubble to hopefully kind of look like ruins that have kind of collapsed and scattered debris everywhere. And so with a collapsing ruin, you'd have a bunch of dust. Oh, thanks for following, a little classy. I really appreciate it. And I guess at that, we'll also give a shout out to the last 2 followers from our game the other day. So this would have been probably the Tuesday live stream game. We had new followers JMull420 and Skiz Jr. Thank you very much. Check out our next live Warhammer game on Saturday, aiming for 3 p.m. Pacific time. All right, here we go. We got some Administratum Gray, and I'm just going to water this down and kind of dab it around on the various helmets and stuff that we've painted. Going for a very watered down paint here so that the colors of these various helmets will sort of show through. And I'm looking to especially get the gray paint anywhere that there's kind of looks like there's debris on the helmet or any rough patches like the top of this one here. And this is kind of fun. Can't really mess this up, just kind of making it look dusty and dirty and obscured. Trying to kind of obscure the paint colors and kind of blend everything together to make it look a little less like a bunch of different colored helmets and just like a bunch of dust colored helmets of various colors, kind of what we're going for. And this is going to be pretty much the last thing I'm doing tonight. Thanks for joining me in this discussion of Games Workshop and 3D printing. If you guys have any last thoughts on the subject that you want to put out there before we wrap up the stream, go ahead and tell us your thoughts now. And if you guys are watching this after the fact on YouTube, go ahead and give us your thoughts on Games Workshop and 3D printing in the comments and subscribe to the channel. And thanks for checking us out. Already did that one, I guess. Mortis Obscura. I mostly just scream at people on Reddit about IPA being a shit paint stripper. IPA? Isopropyl alcohol? I assume. When I'm stripping miniatures for Warhammer, I've used Pine Sol, I think. And I know that people recommend Simple Green. I don't know if that's a British product, or maybe I've picked that up here in the US as well. Stripped miniatures, I think, only twice in my life. But if you do pick up miniatures and you want to get the paint off of them to paint them over again, call that paint stripping. And there's a few different products you can use, but pretty much like a lot of household cleaners will remove paint from metal and plastic miniatures if you let them soak for a few days, and then scrub them with a toothbrush. It's usually how I do it. Oh, hi, welcome Warlander TV. Good to have you in the chat. EconoClean is available out of Las Vegas. Works mind-blowingly well, and you can drink the stuff. Is that advisable? Interesting. Any thoughts on 3D printing and Warhammer, Warlander. Do you think that 3D printing is going to eventually doom the miniatures production business? Or do you think that they help each other? Or do you think Games Workshop's going to find a way to adapt? Will they perhaps become a media company or a rules company and get out of producing miniatures? Or do you think that Games Workshop is always going to have the best, highest paid miniature designers, and therefore their new miniatures will always be the best that you can get? Because I could see it where they are able to basically hire all the best miniature designers, so the third-party stuff is never quite as good, but currently I feel like it's really giving them a run for their money. Some of the third-party stuff is like third-party Catachans are probably better than the official plastic Catachans by far at this point. Warlander TV, I'm worried about its impact on the friendly local game store. And I don't think they're the best. Look at the new Avatar. It literally uses the exact same legs as a Stormcast. Interesting. I've only just seen a couple images of the new Avatar today on my phone while I was at work. Taking a break in my truck. Alright, well that's kind of what I was going for. Maybe let's do a little bit of thicker gray just here and there to kind of help blend everything together. And we're going to be wrapping up the stream. And I'll be streaming again tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Pacific time. And I might be keeping going with this idea of clearing out my miniatures backlog. I've been wanting to change my Genestealer Cult Brood Brothers over to be an Astra Militarum army. And so I've got quite a few Brood Brothers who I just need to basically repaint their skin from being bright pink to a more natural human color. And I wonder if I could even get 1,000 points transition from Brood Brothers to Astra Militarum. Because that's what we've been playing on stream is 1,000 point games so far. Although I guess we are actually going to be playing our first 2,000 point game on live stream this coming Tuesday. It's going to be game 3 between my Orcs and Mark's Templar of the Broken Shard. And so far Mark is ahead 2 games to 0. And if he wins this final battle, then he will have totally defeated the Orc invasion of planet Icarus 4, which his Templar have been tasked to defend. So, very exciting game. If I win, then presumably the Orc invasion will continue and we'll play some more games on Icarus 4. But pretty high stakes, as the fate of the Orc invasion is going to be determined in our next game. And it should be a lot of fun. I've really been enjoying playing against Mark. His Templar of the Broken Shard have a really fun theme. They're kind of like scavenger space marines who operate for centuries on remote planets with no Imperium support. So Warlander TV says when they use the same legs, it legit seems like they're running out of ideas. And I think the 3D print designers are outpacing what Games Workshop can produce. Yeah, I agree. And also, I think a lot of the Games Workshop miniatures seem like they're very clearly designed on a 3D computer now. They're sort of losing some of the hand-sculpted charm, if you ask me. A little classy says, what is your list, roughly? Well, actually, I haven't written my list. A big decision I have to make is what I'm going to use for my HQ. So far, I've been using a War Boss with a Dakilla Claw and a Combi Rocket. which is my sort of my main orc war boss named Lord Humongous. But I have been hinting that Gazkul himself is going to show up in the system, so I could run Gazkul. I've also been running Boss Zagstruck in some of my lists, and I have a weird boy who has not yet seen the table. So those are some ideas for HQ. But I'll tell you this, I am going to break out the Stompa for this game. So this battle is going to be where the Templar have pursued the orcs all the way back to their landing site, where the orcs have been basically staging their attacks on the planet. So I thought it would make sense that the orcs have been taking their landing craft and converting it into a giant Stompa for the next attack. And the Templar are going to basically ambush the orcs or surround and attack the orcs at their landing and staging site where they've been building the Stompa. So that's going to be fun. It'll be literally the first time I've run the Stompa ever. Warlander TV. 2 guys at our friendly local game store bought 3D printers and began to supply the community. It's led to 70% less sales of Warhammer. They let 2 employees go and cut the wargaming play area from 10 tables to 3. That's what worries me. Physical products keep people in jobs locally, shipping, etc. Yeah, I was talking about a sort of anecdote just like that earlier. Maybe it's even one I heard from you, Warlander. But yeah, exactly. People 3D printing for people at their shop, and then the shop cutting their inventory. And like you say, even laying people off. Wow. Well, there's the finished miniature. This is my Genestealer Cult Patriarch, Frank, named after Frank from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Love that show. A bunch of my characters from my Genestealer Cult are named after it. Warlander, I do believe 3D printing is the future, but the impact is going to be larger than most care to admit, 100%. Well, thanks for chiming in on the subject tonight, Warlander. It's really fun having you and everybody else in chat. Guess we'll just go back to the interview cam here to say thank you, everybody, for joining me in another Paint and Chat live stream and discussing Games Workshop and the future of 3D printing. Warlander TV says it's a very interesting subject. I agree. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow. And thanks for the follow, Warlander TV. Good night, everybody. Have a great one.